ever see, did you ever see, did you ever see such a funny thing before?
Max Boyce himself, in the popular series Poems and Pints. Last time on We'll Keep a Comic in the Hillside, I set out to learn all about Welsh comedy. I've always felt that there's something distinctive about the Welsh sense of humour, but it's difficult to put my finger on what it actually is. Yes, there are all those Welsh comic stereotypes that we're all a bit slow and simple, that all we think about is sheep, mining and rugby, but there's much more to Welsh comedy than that. I wanted to find out two things. Firstly, what makes Welsh comedy so distinctive? And also, what it has in common with comedy the world over.
Hello, campers. Welcome to your first morning at Maplin's. We've got a fun-packed programme for you today. Holiday Princess competition, Knobbly Knees competition, Kiddies fancy dress, a bingo in the Hawaiian ballroom, ugly face competition in the Swiss bar, and lots more. But don't forget, we start the week off with our grand get-together at 11 o'clock around the Olympic-sized swimming pool.
Ruth Maddock played Valley Girl Gladys Pugh for 8 years in the sitcom Heidi High, written by David Croft and Jimmy Perry. I asked Ruth what she felt was distinctive about the Welsh sense of humour.
Well, you see, I think is the whimsical way of looking at life, anyway, in Wales, that we have, because we can laugh at ourselves. You go out into the street today, you go to Pontypridd, Aberdare, or any of the valleys, and they still can laugh at themselves. And there's really good what the Irish call crack. And it's wonderful. Like, oh gosh, there's Nanook of the North coming in if somebody's got a hoodie on.
They're not jokes with punchlines,
No,
as it were.
it's the way. It's the way they look at life, which really, I think, is the essence of Welsh humour.
It's sometimes, I mean, when I see Max Boyce, for example, doing his stand-up, it's often the story, the way he tells the story is the funny bit. The punchline often isn't that strong. It's just the lead-up to it.
Yes.
The expressions he uses, the complete Welsh over-the-topness of his performance.
Absolutely.
Is the humour.
Absolutely. And this goes back to our, Taliesin in the 6th century. There were bards. Everybody sat round and listened. They've forgotten about that when the Anglo-Saxons came in England, We have it in Wales. Go into a pub in Wales and they will discuss the price of fish, but they'll also discuss politics with you. This is what I appreciate, even today, about the Welsh way of life.
For 25 years, David Llywelyn from Cardigan was shipwrecked on a desert isle. The lone survivor off a banana boat from Barry. A tropical paradise to some, but lonely for convivial David. He lived on nuts and berries and the odd fish or two. One day on the distant horizon, he spotted a smudge of smoke, lit a fire, and jumped up and down on the sands to attract attention. The captain saw him, lowered a boat, and met old David on the beach. Emaciated David wept into his long grey beard and hugged the captain. 25 years, he said. 25 years on this accursed isle. How have you passed the time, Butt? Asked the captain. Who was Welsh. Come with me, said David, and took the skipper to the top of a hill overlooking a valley. He pointed to 2 wooden structures down in the vale. See those, he said. I built those. The captain gasped in admiration. Do, he said. What are they? What are they? What are they? Cried David. Chapels, of course. 2 chapels. Great, said the captain. Da iawn. Magnificent. But why 2 chapels? You see the one on the left? Said David. Yes, said the captain. I see it. Well, said David, that's the one I don't go to.
Ryan Davis, one of Wales's greatest entertainers, demonstrating that it's the way you tell 'em. And that goes too for some of Wales's current crop of comedians. John Sparks has had a long career telling stories through the characters he creates. How does being Welsh influence the writing process?
Almost all the characters that I've done, really, over the years have been Welsh. There's a couple of non-Welsh ones, but most of them are Welsh. And I'm still coming up with 1 or 2 new ones now, and they're still Welsh. Obviously, at a very early age, when I was born, I was just surrounded by kind of the Welsh culture and Welsh accents and a Welsh way of doing things and looking at things. And there's a thing that I really like in sort of the Welsh comedy that I do, which is sort of invented worlds. Shadwell sort of lives in a sort of a slightly fictitious Swansea with these invented characters, his mother and his terrifying girlfriend, Gravel, and her sister, Latrine, and all these strange things happen, things that are not normal. But I kind of think you can do it because Wales, there's a sense of it being somewhere else, even when you're there. Well, maybe it's just me, but I don't know. And I do it with other characters. There's one I've been doing for a while for ITV Wales called Hugh Pugh, and we've set him in Fishguard, which is a real place, but I've sort of got this sort of fictional Fishguard. And it's not anything like the real Fishguard. I mean, they've got things like, for example, their premier educational establishment there is Fishguard College of Technology, and a lot of scientific places they're sort of working on artificial intelligence. But in Fishguard, they're working on artificial stupidity. Does such a thing exist? Can it be made to exist? Will it ever be as good as the real thing?
I think that any comedy comes out of where the person's from and what their heritage is.
Boyd Clack, writer of 2 very popular Welsh sitcoms, Satellite City and High Hopes.
You could equally well ask, probably the most ubiquitous humour in the world is American humour sitcom, which is essentially American Jewish humour. So you could say, does all American humour base itself on American Jewish humour, which in a way it does. I don't think these are sort of calculated things. I think it's just that a human being is whoever they are, and everything about them goes into what they're doing. And hence, since I am a Welsh person from the Welsh Valleys, that upbringing informs strongly on my and our writing. I don't see really that nationality makes a huge difference in accessibility towards comedy. I've never come across it. We watch Australian comedy films, we love them. We watch English ones, we watch European ones, we watch American, Canadian, you name it, and we all laugh. I think what unites comedy is far more than what separates it. Billy Connolly's done it with Scottishness. Jethro has done it with being from the south of England. To have localised comedy it's once again totally ubiquitous. You go all over the world. You've got parts of America that have a different sort of basis to their comedy, a different mise-en-scene to their comedy. But it actually makes no difference to the comedy. Funny is funny. That's one of the wonderful things about comedy. For instance, you could be with a bunch of people in a jungle. You could be with a group of businessmen in a lift. One of those blokes breaks wind, the others laugh. Someone falls over, provided they don't hurt themselves, everybody laughs, no matter where you're from. And I think this idea of compartmentalising comedy is a bit of a myth, really.
Boyd Clack's writing partner on High Hopes is Kirsten Jones.
What High Hopes is about a family, and this family is set in a little Welsh valleys town, and it's just basically about this particular family that have come together, not necessarily blood related, because we have a mam and we have a middle-aged gentleman called Fagin, who has been in prison, which is her son, and they're broken into by two young scallywags called Charlie and Hoffman. And Charlie and Hoffman, these two young boys, although they're robbing the place, Mam, being very kind-hearted, actually takes them in because the two of them come from broken homes and they all come to live together. So they're a different kind of family. And it's basically a universal theme which is about relationships. It's about these working-class lads' aspirations and in a setting which is working class, but then it could be anywhere. It could be in the middle of England, for example, or it could be in Yorkshire. It's just the same universal themes we use. It's what is funny in any language.
Why don't you just go upstairs and wake him up with a cup of tea? Hello, we're housebreakers, the kettle's on. I've never done it on purpose.
Mam and Fagin come down the stairs and discover these two little scallywags who say that they have come to read the gas, and Mam comes down the stairs and she says, "But we haven't got gas."
You must have got the wrong address.
What have you taken? Nothing.
Nothing?
No, we couldn't find nothing.
Aye, well, we do keep all our valuables hidden away in a secure and safe place, eh?
Where?
In the shed out the back under a tarpaulin.
That's clever, that is.
Aye, who are you? Where are you from?
I'm Dwayne Hoffman and he's Charlie Jenkins. We're sleeping rough, like.
Do your parents know where you are?
My mum and dad are divorced, like, and Charlie's mum's a prostitute, working in car parks in Neath. He don't know who his father is.
You're not gonna kill us, are you, mister?
Oh, they're only young Richard, two little waifs and strays.
I could think of some other names for a mum.
It has been important to do stuff that's Welsh because this is where my roots are. My father's from the Wrexham, Shrewsbury area. I don't come from South Wales, I come from the North Wales, and I'm English on my mother's side. I've sort of got a foot one each side of the border. What we write in High Hopes, although, as I say, it's based on a family in the valleys, what our comedy is about universal themes, about relationships, and they are character-driven. And it's about love and understanding and supporting each other and generosity of spirit. So equally well, we could easily write a sitcom that is set in England or London or wherever because they're about these universal themes.
When thinking of the universal quality of comedy, you need only think of mime, for instance, Marcel Marceau, to name the most classic example. I mean, you have no language there. Go back to silent movies, Charlie Chaplin, you have no language there. This comedy appeals to anyone. I think mime is probably a good example, a good illustration of the fact that comedy is universal. There might be highly little things which people will say, which other people from another society simply don't understand. You might refer to something which is only referred to that way in a localized sense. For instance, in Wales, old miners would refer to their food as their snap, which comes from the snap box, which they used to take their food to the mine. And maybe something like that wouldn't be understood elsewhere. But that's a small thing, and it doesn't happen very often. Modern comedy is very much... Well, modern society has become very much based on these ideas of shows where you laugh at someone because they've got a big nose, or you think someone hasn't made it, so they're a loser, etc., etc. I personally find this repugnant, and our comedy really steers away from that. We try to point out that there is love and care and companionship and good things in the world.
For Boyd Clack, the differences between audiences are few and far between. While languages may divide us, comedy, the essence of what makes us laugh, is actually very similar. Whether you're performing to an audience in Cardiff or Copenhagen.
Now, one of the things that Scandinavia and Wales have in common is that both countries, a part of our sort of national personality is a sort of a morbid introspection. We have an obsession with death and illness and decay and things like that. I don't know why this is. It's probably something to do with our history, our industrial history, where a lot of people became very ill and death was so common because we worked down the pits and people were constantly dying from hideous diseases there. Why it should happen in Scandinavian countries, I don't know. But that is the thing we have in common. Therefore, if someone said a joke of that type, it's quite possible that a Scandinavian person, say, would find it more humorous than an American whose essential thing is that everything is cool and what a wonderful world it is. So you've got little things like that. But I don't think that they're in any way substantial or substantive.
What is the matter with that druid, Daddy? Why is he whistling and limping so?
He's whistling to summon up his bardic spirit. And he's probably got gout in his mistletoe.
Oh!
Is there a distinctive Welsh sense of humour? Well, it's more the English comedians do jokes about sheep. I can't say it, can I? People having an unnatural relationship with a sheep. The Welsh comedians tend not to do that. Yeah, once or twice at a... when I used to do stand-up comedy, you know, I'd start doing a Welsh character and somebody would shout out, sheep, the word I can't say. And I'd say, yes, that's right, we, the word I can't say, them, and you eat them. And I think that's the way I'd prefer it to be.
But if so much of what makes us laugh is actually the same the world over, then why are there so few Welsh characters in British comedies? And with programmes such as High Hopes and Satellite City winning high ratings in Wales, why is there no enthusiasm for airing these shows across the whole of the UK? Veteran comic actor Howell Bennett.
There seems to be a conspiracy to keep Welsh productions firmly in Wales, however good they are. Perhaps the Welsh accent is unpopular with those who wield the power in these matters. I mean, there seems to be no shortage of Scottish accents and North Country productions on the network.
One man who is doing more than most to develop Welsh comedy of all sorts is Gareth Gwenlyn, now head of comedy for the BBC in Wales. Kirsten Jones is just one of the writers who feels that she's benefited from his work in Cardiff.
Gareth has really helped to sort of create the comedy department here in BBC Wales where there wasn't one before, and very quickly over the last 4 or 5 years Boyd and myself have managed to get 4 series under our belts, and which is 24 episodes, which is a considerable amount, and has really helped up-and-coming new actors as well who've been given roles in our comedy, as well as using other people like as guest artists like Howell Bennett we had in the last series, and Victor Spinetti as a guest performance. Gareth has helped put Wales on the map in the area of comedy, definitely.
When it became known that there was someone in BBC Wales who was interested and had hopefully the money and the ability to make comedy programmes and to develop comedy writers, we organised initially a radio competition for 30-minute scripts. And I think I'm not quite sure how many we got in, but it was many hundreds. And of those, about 10%, the normal average, have gone on either to careers in writing for radio or moved into television. And each week that passes, another couple of scripts hit the desk, and every now and again the nugget arrives, and I have the time and the money to develop writers. There are probably 4 or 5 in development at the moment. There is no shortage of decent material.
So there's certainly no shortage of comedy talent in the country. It's just a matter of giving people the opportunity to develop. It's easy to forget that Wales is a bilingual nation. 16% of the population can read, write and speak Welsh, and far more have some level of understanding of it. Who caters for the Welsh-speaking audience in search of a laughter-filled night out? Well, according to John Sparks, there's a problem with that.
With Welsh language comedy actually in the Welsh language, there is a problem, and I heard this from a bloke who reckons that he's the first man ever in the world to do stand-up comedy in Welsh, and he was saying it's very difficult because Welsh is a very formal language, and so it just doesn't lend itself naturally to doing comedy, whereas English is a fantastic language for comedy because it's such an old tart of a language, you know, the same word meaning different things, very useful. But Welsh, it's a different story. So he and his friends are busily coming up with Welsh language slang so that maybe not this generation, but generations to come will be able to do stand-up comedy in Welsh.
Practically everyone who works in our business actually wants to go to America and write films and become famous. And you're not going to do that writing in Welsh. So we have people who basically only want to write in Welsh, but pretty much the first opportunity they got to be offered a lot of money to write in English, they'll snap it up.
It doesn't really matter where you're based.
Comedian Bennett Aaron.
I spend as much time as I can in Wales. The reason I came to London was that at the time that's where the work was. I was doing quite a bit of writing, I still do, and London seems to be the place where there are more opportunities. I've been Unfortunately, I've been offered a lot of things with BBC Wales, none of which ever transpired. So, there's only a few times you can go, oh, yes, I'd love to do that, and then nothing happens, and eventually you go, well, maybe it's just not going to happen. Whereas in London here, I've had more opportunity. I have writing work constantly, writing sitcoms and screenplays. So that's the reason I'm in London, really. Of course, I have a lot of my friends from Wales have moved away themselves, really. So, that's the main reason why I'm in London. If there was more work in Wales, I'd be in Wales. It's nothing to do with which part of the country I particularly like more than another. I am where the work is, really.
There are some writers, as there are some actors, who are perfectly happy to be able to earn a living and have a lifestyle that allows them to live and work in the country of their birth. There are others who have aspirations and who tend to move to London or to another part of the world in order to have their voice heard by a larger number of people. But it's almost more a lifestyle choice, I think, than an editorial choice. Some writers can and do make a living. We have the advantage here, and most of the time it is an advantage, of having another language and a channel that broadcasts in another language. That's S4C, and consequently those people who are Welsh, at least those people who can speak Welsh, have an entire audience, an entire channel that is not shared by the rest of the United Kingdom. So it is perfectly possible to live and work in Wales and be very successful and have the lifestyle that doesn't involve commuting down the A40 or the M4.
So where do the present generation of Welsh comedians get their inspiration from? Well, not surprisingly perhaps, they find it in the same places that the older comedians did. But perhaps give it a new twist for a contemporary audience, more accustomed to a range of different cultures and accents. John Sparks.
The comedy scene in Wales, well, I think the live comedy scene is pretty lively everywhere these days. There's sort of places like Jongleurs and various other sort of chain comedy clubs. There's a very big Jongleur in Cardiff. Lots of English and Scottish and Irish comedians performing there, and the Welsh comedians performing in, outside Wales. It's not really a kind of a ghettoised thing. Can I use the word multiculturalism? I do apologise, I hate that word, but there is a real sort of sense of it. So many people from so many different parts of the world with different accents, it doesn't really matter where anyone's from. Although, I have to say, a few years ago, a bloke I know who used to work for an advertising agency told me about some research that they'd done to find out which was the most popular regional accent. And it turned out that the most unpopular regional accent was Welsh, which I found very depressing. But that was a while ago, and maybe things have changed.
I know actors of my age group that never, ever had Welsh accents, purely because it was knocked out of you when you went to Lambda or RADA or whatever. And they never played on it. But now it's because we are regional. It should be far more acceptable.
I think the Welsh in recent years have become a bit more sexy in the sense that we have, Rhys Evans with his portrayal of the eccentric young lad in Notting Hill. I think that's possibly where it all started recently, playing against the quintessential English gentleman. Hugh Grant played that role, of course. And since then, with Catherine Zeta-Jones and Rob Brydon and so on and so forth, I think we're becoming a bit more sexy. So hopefully that they will take our sitcoms across the border into England, and we'll see it there. We've had Scotland, Ireland, Liverpool, London, Newcastle. They've all had their day, but Wales hasn't, and I hope that it's about to come on our screens.
Bennett Aaron has the distinction of being both Welsh and Jewish, and draws on both influences when writing his stage shows. Still, the first name that comes to mind when asked about the comedians he remembers is one of Wales's old favourites.
I suppose when everybody talks about Welsh comedians, the name that always comes up is Max Boyce, primarily, I suppose, because growing up in the 70s, he was the person that, would be on TV, you'd watch, you'd relate to. And I think a lot of Welsh comedy is very, very colloquial, which is what he did. I mean, it was that type of stuff. It was stuff about rugby, it was stuff that anybody can relate to. It was a lot of use of Welsh words, not so much in Welsh, but just Welsh words that people perhaps outside Wales wouldn't know necessarily the meaning of, very, very colloquial phrases. So I suppose watching people like him gave you an understanding of the type of humour, and it was just nice to watch somebody go, oh yes, I understand that. I know exactly what you mean. Yes, I do that, or my family is like that. So I suppose, although I can't say when I started off, I go, yes, I'm going to write like Max Boyce. I don't think I could, really. But watching that and understanding that, I think, gave me a good grounding, really.
Mr. Redford says that for a divorce hearing, you've got to dress smart. Not smart casual, but smart, you know. No trainers. This first one, just to show you, is the one I took out to Portugal for that smashing holiday we had, and I never wore it. It was too hot. I tried it on, I sweated cobs. And behind it, can't really see, it's a darker suit. It's the one that I got married in. Can't smell it because it's been dry cleaned, but you get a sense of occasion. So, any way you look at it, two very lucky suits.
That was Rob Brydon in Marion and Jeff, one of the few examples of a Welsh comedian making it big on the UK stage. I'd like to see more of that. I believe Welsh performers, writers have a lot to offer. Our rich history, celebration of the underdog, and sometimes dark, sophisticated humour can bring something new to the comedy stage. I'd like to see more of them on our screens.
Oh, I got a cousin Philip who got drunk one night on sheep dip. Then he realised his folly. He was penned up by a collie. Did you ever see? Did you ever see? Did you ever see such a funny thing before?
Uncle Billy, he did die. In the coffin he did lie, but the vicar heard some knocking. Uncle Billy only joking. Did you ever